Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Jason Gay is the author of I Wouldn't Do That If I Were Me, Modern Blunders and Modest Triumphs, but mostly blunders. Jason is the sports and humor columnist at the Wall Street Journal and is very aware of how hilarious that sounds. He was named Sports Columnist of the Year by the Society of Professional Journalists in 2010, 2016, and 2019. And his first book, the New York Times bestseller Little Victories, was a finalist for the Thurber Prize in American Humor. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland with his family, surrounded by way too many in-laws. This is the second time Jason has been on this podcast, and you will hear Kyle, my husband Kyle, and me just fawning over him because we love the way he writes. And by the way, there was a huge excerpt of Jason's fishing essay from this book in the Wall Street Journal the weekend of October 29th. So if you want to search that up, go ahead.
Hi there.
Oh, gosh. Hey. Oh my gosh. Turned up the volume way too loud. How are you?
I'm just great. Thanks. How are you today?
And I brought Kyle. Hope you don't mind.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your kind words.
Oh my gosh.
Major
we're such fans.
I appreciate that a lot.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it on her calendar that she was interviewing you today, and I was like, I need to jump in and
he's like, tell him I'm a fan. I was like, why don't you just sit here? So anyway.
Appreciate that, Kyle. Let me ask you a question. What do you think of all this pickleball stuff?
That's a great question. I think it's really interesting that a lot of guys, like Noah Rubin, for instance, has just decided to make a switch over full time and feels like he has found his home. Being a former tennis player myself who's not gifted with the gift of height, I totally hear what he's saying. And this really takes height out of it. But then again, I recently saw an interview with Sam Querrey, who suggesting that he would probably be the best pickleball player in the world if he decided to pick up a paddle, given his height and his, obviously knowledge and skill of tennis. So, saying that he hasn't seen someone in the top 50 of tennis get into pickleball yet.
Yeah.
I think it has a long way to go. I think we're at the really beginning stages. Saw LeBron just bought a team.
The thing that I was wondering about, just from a business standpoint is that pickleball has this really cool thing for a sport right now, which has this genuine, organic excitement, right? Like people are playing it. You go to almost any community now, and there's a little bit of a pickleball scene happening. And you haven't seen that in tennis since the 70s, really. Just sort of your neighbors are playing pickleball. And it has this advantage, of course, you don't have to run as much. You can learn it in the afternoon. I get why people are excited about it. And I almost worry that if they sort of over professionalize it and they sort of focus too much on the celebrity aspect of it, they're going to sort of squash the thing that is really great. Because the other part of it, Kyle, that I'm curious about is are people going to want to watch it? I like to play it, but do I want to watch 2 hours of people playing pickleball? Is it that appealing? I don't know.
I feel like I would watch it if there was a match right now between Sam Querrey and Noah Rubin, for instance. I would watch that. But
of course.
I am not. It plays often actually nowadays on Tennis Channel, which I find interesting. And no, I don't really watch it. Mainly because I don't like the way it sounds.
You know what? There's $1 billion business out there for someone who invents the first silent pickleball racket. They're working.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a wiffle ball sort of sound.
Oh.
I just absolutely love the sound of a tennis ball and a tennis racket. So for
it's
me,
much more aesthetically appealing, But yeah, I endorse anything that gets people moving, right? So that's great. But it is a funny scene for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to try it out. We should do it someday.
It's almost like everybody started playing Kadima. Do you remember Kadima?
Yeah, sure.
Everyone's like, "Oh, do you play Kadima?" It's like we just do it on the beach.
Yeah.
Too. Like now it's like becoming official. Yeah.
Well, Zibby, thanks for coming on Kyle and my pickleball podcast.
I know. I'm like, this is great. Thank you. My job here is easy. This is great. I'm going to include all this so that everybody can hear about pickle.
There's a lot of pickleball fans out there. They want to know the scoop.
There are. Okay. So you two will be on top of the prototype for the new racket.
Yeah.
We'll see what you two come up with. Well, we loved your new book. We loved your last book, Little Victories. We love this one. We love all your columns. It's the only thing I routinely still read out loud to Kyle. Whenever we're like driving the kids to school and you have a column, I'm like, oh, new Jason Gay column. I don't know. We're just such fans. I feel like so lame even saying that to you, but we just love your sense of humor.
We just drove down to San Diego this weekend for a writers festival that Zibby was speaking at and caught in traffic for like 3 hours. And she read almost your entire book out loud.
That's all we did.
And I almost got in like 6 different accidents because I was crying, laughing so hard I couldn't even see.
I'll have you know, at the beginning of the drive, I was like, Kyle, I should just record this. I'm basically recording his audiobook for him.
And I was like, he does not want you to record his audiobook.
Yeah, so we didn't record it.
In San Diego.
I should have.
That makes me so happy. I mean, I'm sorry you were in miserable traffic, but you know, if that word gets out that like, you know, you can survive the 405 to San Diego or what is it, the 10? What is it? 10?
We were not even on. Don't even ask what we took. We went on the shortest route according to the maps, which was like
we ended up on
hundreds of miles out of the way. I don't know. We were in the desert.
That drive is crazy, right? Because it's either like fine or the worst day of your life.
It was the worst day. It was almost 4 hours, and I was like, "This is crazy."
But it was such a treat to listen and laugh. Oh my God! I mean, you're just obviously such a genius, and it's so beautiful that you share it with the world. So
you're very kind to say so. I appreciate that. And you know, Zibby has been here since day one as a fan, supporter, advocate, and I've just been blown away by what she's grown. So I'm very grateful for the kind words.
Thanks. There were a couple of passages I was hoping I could read, even just like short little sections, if that's okay. I'm not reading the one I'm not going to read the one that made us laugh the most because I want people to go get the book because they will.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay. That was the texting chapter.
Oh, yes. Okay, sure.
Oh my gosh.
My God. I don't want to give it away. That was,
I know, it was so funny.
We were thinking.
So I can't even read it out loud.
Hours later.
But let's see. In your book, you cover really everything that people of a certain age, like we're all thinking about, basically parenting, aging, what time you wake up, recreational sports like golf. And I mean, watching sports, all like everything that and then like the very poignant things about your mom and the cat and the cat escaping. Oh my gosh, it was just anyway. So here are a couple of things that really resonated. One is watching your parents get older and trying to deal with the empty nest-ish to come, perhaps. And you had this one passage where you talked about your mom. Baxter is the cat that you gave her. And you said, we talk about when Baxter should come home, but we don't really make a plan. In the summer, we, quote, borrow him back for a couple weeks on vacation. At first it goes well. We're staying in a house with trees and he can run around outside and chase moths. But then a neighboring dog starts stalking him, so he retreats under another bed. When we return him to my mother's on the drive home, he looks relieved. As we pull out of the driveway, I swear I have the two of them have this conversation. How was it? My mother asks. Don't ask. I need a drink. Baxter says, doers, you know me. She missed him. My mother is not exactly an open book in terms of revealing her own emotions, but she confesses she's grown to need Baxter more than she ever expected. My father has been dead for 6 years, and until Baxter showed up, it was just my mom and the hum of the coffee maker, which is not enough, especially now. I like to whine about my overcrowded apartment and the calamity of young children and how much I want to live on a deserted island. But I know how much it fills me up. It's noise. It's life.
Yeah. I mean, the backstory of this, of course, is that, you know, my mother adopted our cat during COVID. We moved out of town to a house where we couldn't stay with a cat because the homeowner was allergic. So my mother stepped in and adopted this cat and fell in love. And really, it's a love story of this. What I should emphasize is that this is not an entirely book about a cat. It's an essay. there's a couple of stories in there that sort of like form a little bit of hopefully a little bit of a backbone of the book about just this pet and like getting through COVID and what it meant for my relationship with my mother. But, it really was this way to talk about, childhood and parenting and relationships. And I think that, one thing that was a very interesting experience about doing this book was that originally the idea was effectively writing a humor book about COVID, probably the most unfunny thing that's happened in our lifetimes, and a very severe thing that caused an enormous amount of, heartbreak and death and destruction. And yet, we did learn a lot about our interior lives and our communities and what were important to us. And people sort of have, rebuilt their value systems and priorities in the wake of this. And I just felt that, like, since we all went through it, there's some fertile ground there to go at. And, my experience is my experience. I certainly wouldn't claim that it's universal, but I think there are some universal aspects of this experience, in terms of our relationships with our children, parents, families, friends, communities, neighborhoods, and so on. I think that a great shift has occurred. And, in any kind of social cultural revolution, there's always some humor to be found. And that's what I was trying to get at. I made this sound way too highbrow. I'm just trying to make you laugh in a traffic jam. I mean, come on.
You definitely made us laugh in a traffic jam. And it wasn't the first time. Sure. All your books, Zibby, I don't know, they find their way into our lives in a sense that she's reading them to me while we're driving. And it is really memorable.
Well, I appreciate that. Honestly,
no more praise. No more praise.
No, I'm trying to write books that you can kind of pick up at any point, that's not, they're individual stories and essays. And I like reading books out of sequence, even books that are supposed to be read in sequence. I read out of sequence. I don't know what that means, but I feel strongly that, there is a place for humor in our very severe times. And in some ways, I'm trying to do kind of a throwback thing, which is to an era when, whether it was, people like Irma Bombeck or Dave Barry or Louis Grizzard or Molly Ivins or, later Nora Ephron, who, they were contemporary humorists who found, joy and humor in almost anything. And in my little humble way, trying to steal a little bit of that.
I love that. Almost, and Seinfeld too. There's the
sure,
because it's the humor in the everyday, humor in the everyday moments.
Of course, what's the deal with exactly? Yeah. It's sort of like the founding principle of every joke is what's the deal with X.
You also had this funny section about reading. Can I just read these two paragraphs too? You're talking. The context of this one is the fact that we have no attention spans for anything in life at all. And then you say, why bother focusing if no one's demanding it? It's only a matter of time before Broadway shows turn on the lights at the final curtain. Why waste 3 minutes clapping? Musicians will be asked to stop guitar noodling and get straight to the chorus, the song parts we like most. One day there will be a fast forward option for me to press when Jesse or JoJo starts talking about the day at school. I don't care what happened in math. Just get to the dead pigeon you found at recess. Think of skip intro deployed at Thanksgiving dinner. Your Uncle Phil's Canadian camping adventure doesn't stand a chance. We are slicing away the tedium, but at what cost? How long are people going to read books? Do people still read books? Asking someone to read a book these days feels like asking them to join you on a sail from Maine to Portugal. A whole book? Publishers deploy edgy moves to grab readers, the most recent of which is putting curse words in titles as a way of shocking a consumer into attention and purchase. Look at any bestseller list, and 6 of the top 10 books will contain an unnecessary expletive and an exclamation point. To be sure, there was brief talk about naming this book, Hey Asshole. But come on, I can't publish a book with that kind of crude title. At least not while my father-in-law can still beat me in a fight. Oh, so funny. But it's humor, but of course there's truth in every joke, as Kyle often points out when I make mean jokes. But what do you make of this whole attention phenomenon? I mean, and by the way, I've watched every intro since even every time it said skip intro. I'm watching the intro now. I'm watching the intro.
Good for you. I mean, I've definitely gotten to the skipping part. I mean, listen, I'm just as guilty as anybody else of sort of falling into this atrophying attention span world that we live in. I am frightened by how, quickly I can shift to like watching short videos and TikToks and, things on Instagram and just like sort of amuse myself that way and feel less and less inclined to invest in something that requires the full span of my attention. And especially when you sort of consider the biochemical element of it, the neurological aspect of this that publishers are capitalizing on. It's frightening. It's frightening for anybody who has a job, mine included, that requires people to focus for, in the newspaper column, 90 seconds to 3 minutes, or in a book, longer than that. And yet it's really funny. It is funny that people have just kind of gotten to this point that we are just sort of taking out any of the tedium. I mean, there's that old book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I feel like we've really officially arrived there now, because we are kind of striking out anything that is just sort of unnecessarily, explanatory or slow. Anybody who's had the experience of going and listening, or rather watching a movie from, let's just go back to the 80s. I mean, a movie from the 1980s feels like a silent film compared to a film that's produced in 2022. When you consider the action and the pacing of a Avengers movie to even something like Star Wars feels like a student film compared to what movies are made like today. And that's a complete, cave to this sort of short attention span world that we live in. And so, I want to sort of, in my humorous way, resist it, because I do feel there's incredible value to those kinds of things. There's value to sitting through the credits and learning who are the masterminds behind the shows that you love, and the actors and the key grips and the set designers who spent, their genius and time putting together these kinds of things. But I worry about it, and listen, one of our jobs as parents is, of course, to professionally worry about our children and the next generation. And I see my own children's attention spans, and when I see the videos scrolling across my children's, brains, I sit there and I think, they're never going to have the tolerance for a 2-hour movie. My son sat down, he was homesick a couple of weeks ago, and he watched a movie. And to me, it was like watching him build a table. He had not done that kind of thing in a long time, and I was kind of proud of him. It's like, I'm proud of you, Jesse, for watching a movie. If someone had told me that I could stay at home and watch a movie when I was 9 years old, I would have been dancing in the streets. But to him, it was like work to actually labor through that much attention for that long.
It's true. We recently took away the iPads from our little kids, because I got to a point where I was about to throw them against the wall and happily watch the glass shatter. They were just so addicted, and they're young. I mean, I shouldn't even admit this. They're 7 and 9. And so one day this summer, I was just like, that's it. I'm done. I'm sending these to New York City without you, and whatever. And then I couldn't find them. So now they're back to watching TV shows together, which I love. And they have to negotiate what show to watch. And they watch 26 minutes at a time. And I'm like, this is great. I feel like a good parent. Whereas before with my older kids, I was like, you can only watch TV once a week and So.
I'm literally right there with you. My children are 7 and 9. They're exactly in that spot. I don't like the sort of idea of them sort of hunkering off on their own to have their own entertainment, that. I mean, you see that even people go away on their, summer vacation, and everybody's got their iPads out at night watching 5 separate forms of entertainment. Whatever happened to baking, making the popcorn and watching a bad movie together? We need to have those sort of communal experiences. I mean, if we learned anything from COVID, it is our sort of, incredible desire for human interaction. The idea that we could be some sort of self-sustaining species is not true. We do crave those kinds of things. And the reason why people are so excited to get back out there again and have those kinds of experiences, to go see Top Gun, is exactly that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so it's good
I do find it interesting, though, that people have a really hard time sitting down to commit to a 2-hour movie, but they will sit and watch 10 hours in a row of some show.
Yeah, I mean, our older daughter is 15. Yesterday, she's like, I watched 6 episodes of Riverdale. And I was like, what? Anyway, it's terrible.
No, but don't you think that part of that is a function of the way that shows are constructed, which they're almost constructed the way that Dan Brown wrote his novels, which was every, they're very brief chapters, and they all ended with, and he turned the corner and you never believed what happened next. And of course you're moving. the way that episodic TV is structured, it's making you move on to the next because you can't stand the idea of putting it down then.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's true. Just like your essays.
Absolutely.
There's one more. You didn't get to read this one because I read on a little without you. I'm really sorry. Yes. But it's about aging, which was also really funny.
All right, I'll take it.
Okay. Last couple things. Am I reading too much? I can stop if this is.
No, please.
Okay, this is the last one. Allow me to be the zillionth person to discover that to age is to be constantly reminded of aging. It is nothing less than a steady abandonment of youthful sensations replaced by a slow climb of infirm sensations, atrophy, and not infrequently pain. I am lucky in this regard. I do not have acute pain. I know people who do, and it is merciless and grinding, the kind of wincing that alters behavior and actions and can overtake a life. I mercifully do not have this. When the conversation at the barbecue turns to the various states of back hell, discs, sciatica, stenosis, I am relieved to not make a knowing contribution. My back at the moment seems sturdy, and this feels like a miracle as I spend much of my day hunched over a computer like a squirrel. I sometimes debate buying one of those posture buzzers that wheeze out an air raid system whenever the wearer's shoulders hunch. It sounds terrifying, and I decided it's much calmer to just hunch. My pain is more mild, dull-shaped. It is the feeling of not living in a pristine body, but instead renting a rundown cottage in Maine with poison ivy in the front yard. Oh my gosh. I tried to write about aging on Instagram the other day when I was having like a similar moment. And this is just like, I'm like, oh, look at how funny people can write about aging. Mine was like this sort of despair, like complete existential despair.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is, again, sort of one of the most universal experiences. We all have it eventually, hopefully some less severe than others. But what provoked this, honestly, was, I play in this little tennis group and, at the changeovers, we would sit there, there was a time when we'd talk about our lives, our careers, our children. But now all we do is talk about our various pains. It's like sort of like we do an inventory of the knees. The next changeover, we do an inventory of the shoulders, then the ankles, then the backs. And it's like everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's got a chiropractor. Everyone's got some take on some new form of, whether it's, yoga or exercise in some fashion to solve things. But what also provoked this was during COVID, I broke my fourth toe. This is a toe you don't even realize exists. It's the toe next to your pinky toe. It's kind of the Marcia of your toes. Like no one really pays any attention to this poor toe. But I got a stress fracture in it. And I don't know how it happened. I didn't kick anything. I didn't drop anything on my foot, but it laid me flat. I mean, it made me whimper. And it just was the most absurd, mechanical breakdown of my body. And it really made me question my existence. And it really required me to stop doing anything, which is what, a stress fracture, you kind of go to the doctor and they shrug and say like, well, you got a stress fracture. What are you going to do? You can't really cast it and keep it, unused because it's in your foot. Anyway, long story short, I feel that this will be a continued topic throughout my life as I continue to atrophy and infirm, so there could be more of this to come.
I hope so. I hope so. I know people talk about aging a lot, but finding all the humor in it is really important because it can be very depressing and discouraging. It's like, your body is overtaken by, terrible forces, changing everything about you. And there's nothing you can do except try to cover it up if you choose or not.
Yeah, sure. But also the other aspect of it is sometimes it's just good old fashioned luck. We all know people who didn't really take care of themselves, who for whatever reason just are in fantastic fit health. And then people who are constantly trying every new diet and exercise routine, who are constantly struggling with, body breakdown. So there's an element of roll of the dice here, which I think is really maddening as well.
So true. So are you what's the plan? Because I'm like, oh, do you guys know Jason Gay? He writes sports, but I know you don't have to like sports. He writes about parenting. He writes about all this stuff. For some people, it's forget the sports part, even though that's your whole job. So,
yeah, but I feel like even the sports part is you don't have to be a fan of sports to appreciate
that's true.
The article. I always think about it, and I always think, wow, if someone didn't like sports, they would find this article about sports really entertaining.
That's true.
Yeah.
So talk about, your sports passion,
Sure.
Your career, what you're going to write about, essays versus
Sure.
and all that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, first of all, I appreciate all those kind words. And you're exactly describing what I'm aiming for, which is to try to write general interest columns about things that are happening in the world of sports that they have appeal to people who might not be closely following into it. It began with this environment that I'm in. I write for the Wall Street Journal, not known as America's like leading sports publication, right? Not known as a place where humor is the principal way of delivering information. So I was already an oddball to begin with, but to me, I felt this enormous advantage because I didn't have to do the sort of hardcore sports stuff that you might have to do, say, if you're at the Daily News or ESPN or someplace where you have serious sports fans paying attention. So it allowed me to experiment a little bit, reach an audience of people who, again, are reading the paper because they have much more important things going on. And this is just kind of a little piece of dessert that they can have later in their read of the paper. And it is the number one thing that I hear from people, that they aren't a big fan of whether it's football, basketball, baseball, whatever the sport du jour is, but they read this because it amuses them, because they might learn something. I always try to keep in mind the idea that, somebody coming to a sports story doesn't always have all the information, certainly that I do, or even the regular everyday sports fan does. I mean, if you spend any time nowadays watching ESPN or sort of hardcore sports radio, the intensity of knowledge now is staggering. I mean, the amount of information that's accessible to the regular sports fan at home now via computer and analytics and beyond is incredible. So it almost sounds like people are speaking a foreign language. If you're coming to this not knowing much about basketball and listening to a basketball podcast, you're like, these people are speaking French. I don't get any of this. Like, what's going on? So I try to keep in mind the fact that there is still a substantial population of casual fans, people who might tune into the Super Bowl second half to watch the halftime show and the commercials, and people who watch, one tennis event of the year, it's the Wimbledon final, or they watch the Olympics. But they have kids who play sports. They play sports occasionally themselves. There are all kinds of ways that sports can enter individual lives that aren't necessarily about the X's and the O's and the betting lines and all that kind of stuff. And I want to grab those folks.
Very smart.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So what's your career plan going forward? Where are you headed?
I'm just running out the clock here, Zibby. I'm just going to hang on as hard as I can. I mean, listen, the funny part about being in the newspaper business is that, I've now been at this for, more than 25 years. And at no point did anyone ever pull me aside and said, hey, man, newspaper business, that's where it's at, right? It's been a constant siege. It's been, since the day I began in it, a profession that has been categorized as endangered or on the verge of destruction. And certainly there has been a lot of carnage in newspapering. We've lost a lot of tremendous publications and so on. It's not a career that when kids come home and tell their parents they want to become a newspaper reporter, the parents shake their hand and say, that's great. I was hoping you were going to be a newspaper reporter and not a neurosurgeon or a private equity guy. I'm thrilled you're going to risk it all. But I just believe very much in it. And I still believe that, good writing and stories well told and reported and truth to power means something. And there still is a lot of consequential stuff happening. And this is a long way of saying that, there isn't a part of me that wants to try something radically different. There are kinds of writing that I'd like to, try a little bit more of. And I'd love to continue writing books. That's been a really validating experience. I mean, it's been interesting to sort of meet people who say like, oh, I read your book. I found it interesting. Do you write anywhere else? I'm like, yeah, 4 times a week at this other page. I'm writing all the time, man. But there is a different audience you can reach through books. And I'm thrilled about that. But I do like the fact that, if I have a thought about something I care about, I can kind of unload it in this paper. And I'm very grateful to be at a place where, as we all know, the journal has this incredibly august reputation for financial reporting. And I sort of get to ride in the back of the jet ski, on this incredible paper with all these talented people. So I sound like I'm joking, but I would sign a lifetime deal. I found the thing that I want to do.
Amazing.
Love it.
Well, thank you so much for all of your entertainment. I will buy anything you write, read everything. It's just so great. So Thank you for delighting us.
I appreciate both of you, and I appreciate your support from, again, day one. And when I was this little random person, I'm still little and random, but even more little and random person out there, just trying to find my way. And let's get some pickleball going. All right,
let's do it.
Absolutely.
I mean, we'll make Kyle play. What are you, righty or lefty?
Righty.
Okay, so we'll make you play lefty. I'll do it. The rest of us will play.
Perfect. That'd be really fun.
That would.
Okay. All right.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Jason. Bye.
Thank you.
A couple of years ago, right before the pandemic arrived and the world changed, I took my son Jesse to the Daytona 500. I had no idea the planet was about to shut down, but in retrospect, it was a pretty rowdy way to say farewell to civilization. Jesse was in. I don't even think I got to the second syllable of Daytona. He was 6 years old and obsessed with Hot Wheels, Camaro fumes, and monster trucks. He'd watched Cars 1,000 times, to the point he grew mildly disappointed when the Impala in traffic next to us wasn't anthropomorphically chatting to us through its front bumper. Stock car racing is not for everyone. 4+ hours of Chevys, Fords, and Toyotas making left-hand turns is not a big topic of conversation among the flabby New York City dads I know who bicker about pavement records and drink overrated $6 pour-over-ice coffees. But for Jesse, book it. I figured the trip wouldn't be a big hassle. A quick flight from New York City to Orlando, short drive from Orlando to Daytona Beach, and then we'd drive around for 7 or 8 hours looking for parking. Easy peasy. What I didn't count on was what it meant to fly to Orlando. The moment we stepped on the plane, Jesse saw them. Kids dressed in Disney gear, clutching Mickeys and Minnies and doe-eyed princesses of every hairstyle and rank. These kids were not going to the Daytona 500. They were not impressed by a small block 358 Ci V8. They were off to the Magic Kingdom, or Animal Kingdom, or Epcot, or Blizzard Beach Water Park, and probably all the above. And I realized that I was going to be spending this trip playing Disney defense against the child who had never been. The arrival at the airport was much worse. Orlando International Airport is basically a portal into the inner ear of Mickey Mouse. From the moment of disembarkation, there is an assault of Disney consumerism, colorful posters advertising new rides and features, kiosks arranging transit and VIP tours, a sprawling gift shop stocked not with the usual assortment of poly-blend hoodies and beanbag unicorns, but with stacked shelves of Diz-Biz merchandise. Basically, the airport is the Disney welcome drink, and as Jesse and I moved through it, I wish I'd brought him a pair of eye blinders like the ones they put on carriage horses. Are we ever going to go to Disney World? Jesse asked, not demandingly, but plaintively, as if he were asking if we'd ever see a loggerhead turtle in the wild. This is a delicate question for a parent to answer when they are standing in the kitchen 800 miles from Florida. There's no satisfying way to answer it when standing in the middle of Orlando International Airport, when there are shuttle buses outside the door ready to take you, when the entire momentum of the facility is designed to deposit you at the doorstep of Walt Xanadu within 15 or so minutes. No response is sufficient. You can't give your kid a lame excuse about the timing or the season or your inability to find plane tickets. You are literally here. So the only humane thing you could do is to escape, to grab your child by the hand and march them wordlessly to the rental car counter where families waiting in line are, damn it, already in mouse ears. But Jesse didn't toss a fit. I was grateful. He was too focused on Daytona and he seemed to buy my limp suggestion of a Disney rain check. We got on the road to the Speedway, and once we got clear of the greater Mickeypolis, we had a lengthy conversation about the respective driving talents of NASCAR heroes like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, and Martin Truex Jr. All right, fine, that's not true. We didn't know a thing. I had managed to negotiate my way into middle age and a sports columnist job with barely a passing knowledge of anything to do with one of America's greatest spectator sports. If you are embarrassed by this admission, imagine how I feel. It's embarrassing for a person paid to write about sports to not know the difference between Bristol and Talladega, or have the first idea what happens when a car rolls into pit road. They pump up the tires? I don't know. I was the worst sort of urbane caricature. I, too, am a flabby dad with opinions about pavement records and overrated $6 pour-over-ice coffee. I'd faked my way through a few interviews with NASCAR talent by asking basic questions. How's your parallel parking? I didn't know anything, and it was a little mortifying and probably professionally disqualifying. I admit it. Mea culpa. Now, please don't ask me about hockey. Jesse was my vessel here. He might have thought he was my Mary +1, but he was going to be Daddy's portal into the whole Daytona experience. I could write about what it was like to be here, eyes of the child, the whole bit. I could cover Daytona without actually covering Daytona. I could cover it as a dad. Aw, barf. Done.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.